Good afternoon and welcome on in to another edition of From Day One. So with that being said, of course, let's hit the normal mailbags and everything else as we normally do. Today's been a very interesting day for those at least who keep up on legal stuff, which I do, of course, for our part 2 where we have our auditors, frauditors, offices, Karens, and other morons of note. And today, out of Nevada, we almost finally have a full circle conclusion on one of those said morons. So much so that I definitely should go ahead and put this guy on. Well, it's probably take several days of the part 2 episodes to do, but definitely he deserves it. Just though that there was so much I haven't got around to doing it because I figured how to break that much down. But it is one of Mr. Ken Blandino, of all people. It suffice it to say, Mr. Blandino extremely has not even remotely near helped himself in this issue. Not even in the slightest. Where to begin? Several years ago now, and when I mean several, I mean several. I mean even pre-pandemic several. Mr. Blandino had a simple traffic ticket. And you might be going, this is all over a traffic ticket? At least the genesis of it is yes. Mr. Blandino went ahead. Most of us, when we get a traffic ticket, we just pay the fine and move on. No, he wanted his day in court, which is perfectly his right to do so if he wishes to do so. Proceeding over that case was Judge Pro Tem Michael Federico, who normally in his normal day-to-day operations is a lawyer, but in like a lot of larger jurisdictions, or if they do not have enough regular judges around, they will take lawyers who have had a decent amount of time doing legal work in the areas, give them what they called a pro tem destination, and allow them to hear the lower, smaller items on a court's docket in order to free up the judges to handle bigger and more complex cases and issues. Which is what Mr. Federico was doing that day. He was handling the regular traffic tickets, which Mr. Blandino was one of. Well, the case happened, and Blandino was found guilty. So he's already gone one step above what most of us do. He's actually went in to had his case adjudicated. It got adjudicated not in his favor. So now most of the rest of the people would definitely just pay the ticket and be done with it. Not Mr. Blandino. Mr. Blandino then goes to actually file an appeal on his traffic ticket, which again is his rights to do so if he is so inclined, which, since we're talking about Mr. Blandino, he most definitely is inclined. So that snakes its way up the court proceedings. And the courts at the top of the line hear it and also say no and deny the appeal. So now we've had his day in court, his appeal of that day in court, what to do now, you may ask. And at this point, extremely, anybody who normally would be left would be, okay, I tried. Oh Lord, I tried. I went to trial. I lost. I appealed. I lost. This is just a freaking traffic ticket. Let me pay the traffic. Oh, sorry, folks. Let me pay that traffic ticket. And be done with it. Sorry about that. Would be about where 99.99999% of anybody who was still left would have gone. Once again, though, not Mr. Kim Blandino. Mr. Blandino, now this is being some 8 months after the original, court case. Shows up unannounced at Michael Federico's law office, wanting to talk to Mr. Federico about the case. You go, wait, you want to do what? And he wants to show up to talk to Mr. Federico. But the court case, he's figured that he's been, in his mind, mistreated on. He doesn't get any further than the secretary of the law office, who continually tell Mr. Blandino no, that he cannot talk to Mr. Federico. And on top of that, refuses Mr. Blandino's repeated grilling questions to her about not only Mr. Federico, but if she's participated in any case, rulings, or anything else. Finally gets to the point where Mr. Blandino asks for a piece of paper, which the secretary obliges, and Mr. Blandino spends the next 30 minutes in the office handwriting a note to Mr. Federico. Okay, so we are already on the dark side of legal issues here. But in Blandino world, as I say, this is only the beginning. As we move on to stage 3 here, he then doesn't hear anything back from Mr. Federico. By the way, during the time, Mr. Federico's been a little kind of like worried about a defendant 8 months ago appearing at his law office demanding to speak to him. He's filed a quick case situation with Nevada Metro Police Department about it. But Mr. Blandino, of course, not hearing anything, finds out next time that Mr. Federico is doing pro tem legal work in the court building. It proceeds to march in on the court proceeding as it's in progress. Shit you not. And it looks like we actually failed one here in stage 4. So we're going to have sounds and dominion for that here in just a second. Tell you more about Federico and Blandino after this sound of the dominion in the cross-server Tournament of the Elements. Yeah, improved by over 30 points, but not enough for a win. Damn it. Let's try it one more time before we get back to Blandino. Score. No, it is the same exact score, 205. Damn it. Now let's collect the treasure chest at least. Alright, big many black balls are next. Followed by whatever we're going to do to up the Titan's power for today. Not really anything good in that set of balls. Alrighty, what do we got? Oh, Raji had a little more life to him. He could last a little longer. No. But doubt that's going to be enough. But let's give it one more strike. It is. It's the same exact 205 still. Frickin' seriously. Alright. Let's get a regular fight going. Alright, here we go, chapter 11. We only get these stinking hot. Let's try it one more time. And this time we get a violet item, but not the one we most definitely would love. One more time, and then we'll return to hitting the mail list. And there we are. And yeah, we're not getting our Citadel fragments at the moment, so. Alright, let's go down the mail list. Collecting the items we've already managed to trigger. Okay, I think we're still before the time. Yeah, I think we're at the point where we can collect the energy. No, shoot, we weren't. I thought we were at a point where taking an energy would not put us in red. Okay, we're back normal. Alright. Alright, back to the mail list. Starter summoning, which means just crack an egg. Alrighty. So getting back to Blandino. Blandino finding that he was going ahead and had heard from Federico. Found the next time that he was actually participating as a judge pro tem. Went to that particular courtroom and proceeded to make a whole total of an ass of himself, wanting to speak to Federico immediately. Of course, to which Mr. Federico, thinking this guy is a fucking loon, immediately orders him out of the courtroom. Which, being the judge, he definitely has the right to do so. Especially considering that he's basically obstructing and otherwise preventing the actions of the court. Let's see what the internal summer season has, by the way, while we continue. To which Mr. Blandino fires off another letter. To the moron. this time demanding a public apology, among other things, for his actions. I kid you not. This proceeds in multiple demand letters that Mr. Blandino sends to the judge, pro tem, which finally amalgamates in this final list of demands. Mr. Blandino wants $25 in cash paid to him, which Mr. Blandino during the trial claimed that was to pay for jabs, basically audio and visual recordings of court transcripts and situations, to be paid directly to him to basically reimburse him for that. He also wanted a written letter of apology from Mr. Federico. The assurance that Mr. Blandino is allowed to participate and visit any court proceedings at all at any time. And then for Mr. Federico to go, and mind you, both Blandino and Federico are litigant and judge/lawyer in Las Vegas, Nevada. Of course, if it wasn't Florida, it would have to be Vegas, as we start matching up Sunshine Tower. First 26, of course, are free, so we got a moment. That he would go on his own dime to Reno, Nevada, to take a law course on ethics. That would run him probably about $2,000. He later somewhat recants on this stipulation by stating that if it's too much for him to get out to travel to what have you, that he could solve this particular part of the situation by making a $500 donation to the Clark County of Nevada Law Library, and have to present the receipt to Mr. Blandino that he did so. Providing that Mr. Federico would do all of these items, then Mr. Blandino, who held himself up as a investigator of the Nevada District of Judicial Oversight, would not file any case or any grievance against Mr. Federico, and would fail to do so in any future deals responding from these actions of the state. So, on the back of all of this, the state filed 2 new charges against Mr. Blandino. One, for extortion, $25 in that $500 donation to the law library. Oh, by the way, there was a very interesting proviso in Mr. Blandino's writing about that. If Mr. Federico in any situation would to die before either the payment for the class in Reno or the $500 donation to the Law Library of Clark County was made, that Mr. Blandino himself would get $500 from the estate of Mr. Federico in lieu of solving that particular piece of the puzzle. Mr. Blandino would try to peddle that during the court proceedings. We have a bunch of dead folks for the first fight tonight at $113K. That this was so that he could facilitate the donation to the law library. So, 2 charges. 1, extortion for this. And 2, impersonating an official member of government. as the Nevada Judicial Oversight is a legal and recognized civil body. We'll talk more about that after this fight with Sounds of Dominion in Sunshine Tower. Providing, of course, the next year's loads that fight in the immediate future. Well, since it's fighting, we'll continue with our Blandino talk. If and when it does actually load the fight, I'll immediately as I was saying, immediately stop and wait until the fight was over to go ahead and have those two charges. Those charges were also filed pre-pandemic. And we just finally got a verdict today. In 2022. March. So you might go, how in the hell can a case this open and close? This kind of duh type situation take this long? Well, that's because Mr. Blandino wanted to represent himself. Which, again, is unfortunately in his legal right to do so. It's extremely, most definitely, normally not suggested to, but you do have the right, if you are so inclined, to do so. Which Mr. Blandino was so inclined to do so. Now you might ask, why would a guy like this do that? Was he a sovereign citizen or one of these free man on the land bullshit? Not quite. Mr. Blandino is what I would probably designate having just enough legal knowledge to be extremely dangerous to himself. Not at the top of the Dunning-Kruger curve, so to speak, but just a little bit beyond it. Haven't quite free-falled, but believing that he still knows it, and unfortunately knowing enough, however, to actually make other people's lives a potential living hell. And that is what Mr. Blandino did. For years and years. Proceeding to file recusal notices on every single judge who attempted to hear any part of Mr. Blandino's case. Proceeded to file every legal notion, legal paperwork, every complaint with every body in the world, taking it up into federal court several times, trying to even get the Nevada Supreme Court involved. And no, this is pre-trial that he's doing this still. We finally get one judge who's basically had enough, and she don't care what he's trying to do, and she's not going to back down and be intimidated. After a few more rounds of Mr. Blandino, second that one of his motions gets denied, he immediately files like 3 new ones. Solely basically to clog the holy living crap out of the legal system. Basically grinding it to an epic halt. That she finally really has enough of this. Revokes basically self-representation from the defender's office forced upon him in the name of Ben Bateman, and this is usually don't feel bad for lawyers. However, Ben is a very special case. Ben is one of the very few that I actually do feel for. Because he has to try to basically win virtually an unwinnable case while putting up with Mr. Blandino trying to self-derail his own case in the process. And this guy really knows how to try to drag things out. At one point, they've tried to order a competency evaluation. Basically, see if you're competent enough to stand trial to defend against actions and arguments that are sent your direction. And they order Mr. Blandino to go and have these competency evaluations by X and X of a date. He proceeds back to court without having those competencies done. He just has appointments for them several months in the future of the court case checkup status for those. So therefore, in his mind, he can legally say, see, I tried, but this is all they had available, type thing. Just so he can continue to stretch and delay the procedure even further. Okay. This finally gets to the point where they actually have to order him to jail so that they can do the competency hearings with him behind bars to make sure that it indeed gets done. That competency hearing gets done right about when the pandemic actually does hit, so back in March 2020. The findings of the evaluations is that yes, he may be incredibly stupid, his mind might be completely firing on wrong beliefs, but he most definitely is competent. Which follows to a very interesting Blandino moment where they have a kind of like telephonic style court hearing between the court office and jail, where the judge tells Mr. Blandino that yeah, the findings of the competency hearing is that yes, you're competent and you'll be released from jail by the end of that day to await trial. To which Mr. Blandino goes, "No, I'm not competent. I want to stay in jail." He objects and fights that the competency hearing said he was competent. So I said, if this wasn't a real case tying up real time in a real court, this would be incredibly funny. If this was like a Japanese law anime or something, it'd be incredibly funny. The fact that it's real life, not so much. So in the uncreaming months, he tries repeatedly to get Ben thrown off the case, the court-appointed attorney. He, of course, has to throw a "I'm not going to wear a mask" argument into this as well. You know, why not be a little slapstick Karen and COVID Karen mask type situation on top of everything? Anything he could think of to delay the proceedings, which by this time, of course, they're working off Zoom and everything else, so they just say, nope, you're going to sit in the Ben Bateman's office and proceed telephonically. So we're not delaying for this. To which finally, after about 3 or 4 times, gets the hint that no, Ben Bateman isn't being removed. He's your attorney. If you want something said in court, it's going to have to go through Ben. So, with all of that said, with all of these years of time as we get to our last fight of the tower, so all systems will go, about the last 2 weeks, we finally get the court case underway. Jury, everything. And the argument then, of course, comes, is Mr. Blandino going to testify? Ben is extremely saying, no, don't let him, Your Honor, please, for the love of, don't. Blandino is most definitely like, yes, I want to, yes. And again, Fortunately, it is his right to do so if he so inclines to do so. Now, especially if you do not have your attorney agreeing with you that you should testify as a defendant, here's one of the biggest reasons against it. Your attorney can fight tooth and nail to have a lot of things excluded from trial, like say previous felony convictions, legal records, and like claiming that they would be prejudicial to the jury if they heard them, which they most definitely probably would. If there's a record painting that you're a previous criminal, it's only human nature to believe that it's more than likely that you would continue to be a criminal individual. Whether that's true or not, in your case, is immaterial. It's just a human mind that, kind of like the old rules, anything at rest remains at rest, and anything in motion wishes to remain in motion until something acts upon it. This is the same kind of situation. But if you say the wrong thing in your testimony, that allows then the prosecutor on cross-examination to question it, to bring in that otherwise already excluded information. You may be undermining what you had already worked to have excluded. Which is why you want to make sure that you and your lawyer are on the same page if and when you're going to go ahead and testify. You do not want to be saying one thing when your defense attorney would be like, no, at the same situation. Okay? So that happens. And since his defense attorney definitely doesn't want him to do this, he really isn't in a mood to question. So it's an open-ended presiding of testimony by Mr. Blandino, to which the judge really has to lay down extreme tight rules as to what is and isn't allowed, and extremely having to keep him on path as to what is and isn't allowed to be stated, to keep him on track, so to speak. So we have that for a few days. We finally get through all of that, and we finally get to a point where it's finally time for kind of like closing arguments. Yay. Collect that bunch of coins. So the way the prosecuting closing remarks works there in Nevada is that the prosecuting attorney goes first, then the defense attorney goes second, the prosecuting attorney then gets what's called a redirect, or a rebuttal. And usually, but if not always required, if needed by the defense, they can rebut if there is anything new brought up by the prosecution in the rebuttal. So the prosecutor goes and puts on their closing arguments, perfectly fine. Mr. Bateman goes and puts on his closing arguments, again, perfectly fine. Prosecution gets up for the rebuttal, starts to put that on. Now, when you're giving your closing testimony as an attorney, you're allowed to move around and talk while you're giving that closing presentation. Heck, if I'm a defense attorney, I can go right up to the prosecutor's table, point right at him, and say, members of the jury, these people lied about, and then whatever it was, and point right at them while I'm doing so. Likewise, the prosecutor can immediately do that to the defense, to the defendant. They can walk up and say, this defendant committed murder or committed theft or whatever the charge was, and point right at the defendant while doing so. Now, some people would say this is to try to get a rise out of a defendant, to try to spark a reaction, and it may definitely be. But you have to realize, being in a trial situation, not to fall for this. Now, the prosecutor in this case wasn't going directly up to the table, directly pointing, directly calling out the defendant, Mr. Blandino, by name. Or any of this. But by about a third time that the prosecutor even got remotely near the defense table while giving the rebuttal, Mr. Blandino started standing up and yelling at both the prosecutor and the judge, claiming that this shouldn't be allowed. He's trying to pursue a deal. He should be censored. He should have a charge filed against him. All of this. Remember, this is going on while the jury themselves are present in the courtroom. To which the judge, as quickly as possible, tries to get the jury out of the room. They have conversations outside of the jury, going, this is definitely not called for, it's definitely a bad look for you. Can you go ahead and keep yourself in line so he can go ahead and have his cross? If not, I'm going to remove you. And while Mr. Blandino argues extensively, at the end he finally says yes. The jury gets brought back in. The prosecutor is allowed to continue his rebuttal. However, Mr. Blandino is still not done. Getting upset at what's being said, he goes and dumps water on top of himself. Again, in the presence of the jury. that finally goes to tomorrow, well, today actually, where the verdict finally comes in. And as we're out of time, we will talk about that in a later time. But in the meantime, of course, like, share, and subscribe. Get us to those goals of 50,000 views, 1,000 subscribers. Boxing Extras will send us some nice red packages. And YouTube will recognize us, CoinBase and Ibotta below. Fill them out to get your $10 free. And CoinBase Learn, your 2-minute lessons, 1-question quizzes for $100 free crypto. And Ibotta, we're rewarding you for what you normally have to do anyway, and that's shopping. So until we meet next time at 2 a.m. UTC, 9 p.m. Eastern, like, share, and subscribe. Be kind to one another, and it's always a great new world to release the Krakens. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you tonight as we continue to march along here from day one. Have a great day.